Hello, my name is Dwayne Lemon.
And I'm Lance Wilbur.
And we want to welcome you to A True Knowledge of Self, where we get to know ourselves from a biblical perspective. We have an opportunity today where we're going to interview Lance Wilbur. I had the privilege of being interviewed by him to give him a little bit of my story, but I'm especially excited about talking with Lance and hearing about his story, because that same principle that was in our previous episodes talking about overcoming and the ability to do that by the word of our testimony as found in Revelation 12 and verse 11. I'm thankful because I had an opportunity to share from a different perspective of my experience in the hip hop and R&B culture. Brother Lance comes from a different experience, and I think his experience is going to speak to many of the hearts of those who are viewing with us today. So I'm very excited about this. Lance, I'm really happy to have you with us, brother.
All right.
So that we can hear a little bit about how the Lord has led you in your experience as it relates to growing up outside of Christ, outside of the Bible, growing up in urban youth and urban environments and so on, and how the Lord has led you. I'll just go ahead and start by just asking you a simple question. Tell us where you're from. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
All right. Well, I'm from Massachusetts, still in the Northeast and the East Coast. Slightly different experience. I grew up, I was born in the suburb, moved into the city, there for a short period of time, back out to the suburb in which I was born, right outside on the outskirts of Boston. And as, you know, a young man, some of the same challenges as we discussed, but I'm raised in a single parent household. A little different dynamic. My father is in and out. So it's not like I didn't know who he was, but he was in and out. And some of the memories, complete chaos and domestic violence and all kinds of madness. So I had that coming up. So obviously there's the obvious void. When you're growing up as a young man, no father figure to speak of, boyfriends coming in and out of the picture with the mother, really no consistent male figure to pattern myself after.
Now, if you don't mind, just, you know, looking back at that, when you think about your experience coming from single parent home, and you said there was domestic violence, was that something that was inflicted on everybody in your household, or was it just, you know, how was that manifested? How did that affect you, man?
Strangely enough, it was just between my father and mother.
Okay.
I mean, my father never touched me, never laid a hand on me, you know, maybe once in a while for discipline's sake, but never struck me or anything like that. But I've seen situations where, you know, I've seen him do crazy things that I won't mention for his sake, but the kinds of things that you never forget, and that you're helpless at a young age, 5, 6, 7 years old. You're absolutely helpless. You can't do anything to prevent it. So it was traumatic, but it was something that became normal.
Now, this is interesting because, you know, we're hearing unfortunate recent reports about young men who go on a gun craze and they will not only take the lives of others, but sometimes they take the lives of their own parents.
Yeah.
In other words, something they saw from a childhood that obviously stuck in their minds to the point that it seems almost as if when they grow up and get older, they're thinking, once I get my chance, I'm going to let it loose. Were these the kind of thoughts, vengeful thoughts or anything like that was going on in your mind?
You can say that, but I consider myself now looking back, I was always thinking. So I was always in my own kind of world and trying to rationalize and think things through. So I felt that I could control, you know, my aggression. So, but if my aggression, you know, let go, then it was going to be problems. But I tried to, or I prided myself, if you will, on my ability to control, you know, my environment, my situation, my actions, my behavior.
Okay. So now, you know, you're growing up in a home where it's broken and dad is not around anywhere near to the amount he needs to be. Mom is obviously trying to play a role of mother and father as much as possible. Siblings?
I had a younger brother eventually, but he was like 8 years younger than me. So really, I had half sisters that lived in different states. So it was pretty much me and my little brother came along, but we had a large age gap.
Okay, all right. So now, growing up, you got your younger brother, but you know there's a gap. So I don't know. You probably didn't have as tight a relationship with him.
Nah, not like we grew up together.
Okay.
I was always way in a whole nother stage of life as he's coming up.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you're growing up. You're at home. Mom is obviously trying to work to take care of you all, and so on. I would assume that if mom is trying to be mother and father, and then on top of that, she's busy working and so on, that means you had a lot of time to yourself.
I had a lot of time to myself, and that's pretty much where some of the challenges and the problems came from. So I can't really blame my parents. My mother was a nurse. She worked long hours, double shifts. She was constantly out of the house. So yeah, coming up, you're pretty much taking care of yourself, because once you hit that age where you can take care of yourself, you're home alone. And then and when my little brother's coming along, I'm taking care of him, at 7, 8, 9 years old, basically watching an infant for 8 hours at a clip, coming home from school, and you're kind of living on your own, if you will. So it was pretty much in that setting. There was no real religion in my household, no church to speak of, no prayer, or even any religious discussion or concepts that I can remember as a little child. And my mother was young as well, and she had her own life, and partying and music. It was a biracial household as well. So I was exposed to the full spectrum of cultures and music and everything else. So yeah, it was a challenge. There's no question about it. And at the same time, you're going through the normal changes and the normal development and the normal stages, and trying to find your own and trying to find where you fit in. And so we find ourselves moving a lot. Financially, we're in poverty pretty much growing up. It's not like we didn't eat.
Yeah.
But we didn't have what everybody else had. So I found myself escaping into entertainment, escaping into music, escaping into movies and everything else. And now where I'm out in the suburbs at this time, so I'm getting exposed to hip hop for the very first time through the TV, through images, old, I think when MTV's just starting out, and they had Video Music Box and V66, and they're playing these music videos, and you had movies. And you had, music. We had local in Boston area. We had local groups, your New Edition and Ed O.G. and the Bulldogs. And so there was hip hop in Boston, but it was nowhere near the same scene. There was the industries, the labels, the industry was not present in Boston like that. There weren't many studios to speak of and executives to speak of. So most people, if they wanted to make it big or they wanted to get in, they had to go to New York. They had to go through New York to do that. So I'm getting exposed in that way. And pretty much now, as I'm going into, we moved into another section of the city. And this was supposedly the bad section of the city. And new group of friends, new neighborhood. I'm going into junior high, and I was always big. I was always taller than everybody in my class, and so I always hung around with older people, older age groups.
Now, what was your attitude like when you transitioned into high school? Because you remember when I went into high school, I'm a nobody, nobody's recognizing me, no one wants to be my friend. I had to use something. I mean, when you came into high school, were you going in insecure? Were you going in like, look, I'm the man? What was your attitude like going into high school as you're branching into this new phase of your life?
Yeah, it was a slightly different in that I felt that I had a reputation, I had a niche. As I'm getting older, I'm always bigger, and that holds weight in the street. So I found myself being able to establish myself and do anything I wanted to do and lead other people. So I had my crew and lead other men and other kids, and pretty much make my own way. So by the time I'm getting into junior high, that's developing. So by the time I get into high school, I already had kind of a reputation that preceded me. And I felt like I was where I needed to be. And if anyone wanted to challenge that, then I was ready for that challenge.
So now, right now, you're at a point where, you're what I'm going to say was the typical urban youth that we see a lot going on, sometimes single parent home, growing up with a television, video games, and friends are pretty much what's around us more than our own parental guidance. Then on top of that, you're in school, you're using the influences of what you got naturally. You're a big guy, so you figure, let me use that to my influence to be influential to others and so on. Where is the role of, the influence of hip hop culture at that point in your life?
Like I said, when I moved to this new section of town, the South Side is what we called it, and I got a new group of friends. And this new junior high I'm going into, I moved right at like the tail end of the summer. I got exposed to the music. Basically, you know, we had the tape store, the record store, and go down to the record store and they would put out new music. And I just remember just one summer in particular, a couple of individuals that I had met through my mother's, they worked with my mother. They had just gotten out of New York. There was a brother from Harlem and a brother from Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And so they're talking about, you know, these different groups, some of the groups I never heard of. So I go to the record store and I pick up, you know, your Slick Rick and your Tribe Called Quest mm-hmm. and your KRS-One and your Cool G Rap and your, so I start getting into this. There were other young people, like all the way, I can go back to elementary school, and some of my classmates, their older brothers, and Beastie Boys comes out, you know, I think it was called License to Ill or something. And so they're coming in school singing these songs. Never heard anything like that in my life. Completely different. Run DMC comes out. And there's just things that completely different, you know, new. And so that's attractive. Yeah. You know, becomes attractive. It's the new thing, it's the cool thing, it's the popular thing, at least amongst the young people. So I started just becoming a junkie, you know, like a music consumer to the max. And I didn't have money to buy it. I would just go in and steal the stuff. So as I saw being practiced in my surroundings, you know, theft and beat downs, selling drugs, partying, I just got into that at an early age. You know, 10 years old, I was smoking. 10 years old, I was drinking. 10 years old, I was going to parties and getting involved with girls and all that stuff. So by the time I'm 11, 12, 13, 14, going into high school, I mean, that was my lifestyle every day.
Now, curious, when you were listening and getting more heavily exposed to the hip hop culture and all that comes with it, and you know, and we're saying hip hop culture for a reason, because sometimes people just focus on the music and the industry, but it's not just music and industry, it's a culture, it's a complete lifestyle. So we're being very deliberate about that, and we're going to build on that in you know, further programs, just so that we can all be on the same page and understand this. But you know, Lance, when we're talking about that, you're exposed to this hip hop culture now, all these things are coming in. One of the things I'm curious about from the artist standpoint, you just mentioned all these hip hop artists. Who are the ones that appeal to you most and why? There's a reason I'm asking this question.
Yeah, I understand. Obviously, what appealed to me most was the intellectual, you know, the knowledge, not just the guys there rhyming and just, you know, making words connect and just the party songs, the club songs, but, you know, the brothers that are actually putting together and constructing complex, deep, intricate rhymes, the wordplay, you know, the syllables, the metaphors, those kind of things. That's what I mean. I dedicated myself to like memorizing and studying the artist and seeing how this could happen. And we had local MCs. Yeah. And so there was one. It was like in the next grade above me, and he was like the local main MC. So every school party, dances, every get together, he was the man, he was the MC. So he became part of my crew. And so we used to get together, you know, party, listen to music, and I would always memorize the rhymes. And at a certain point, he used to, you know, write rhymes and kind of try to, not kind of teach, but he challenged me one day. He was like, listen, I noticed that you can memorize all these rhymes and you can repeat them exactly, you know, precisely with the delivery, the timing, all these things. Why don't you try writing your own rhymes? And I said, I never thought about that. I said, that's an interesting challenge. And so there was an event, I had an altercation at my high school, and, you know, they threatened to kick me out. They wouldn't let me come back in without a psychological evaluation. I had to go through this counseling and kind of like anger management before there's anger management. And at that moment, that's that moment when I was waiting to go see the psychiatrist or whoever it was, a counselor, I wrote, you know, my first rhymes. And I wrote my first rhymes, and that
launched.
was it. That was it.
Now, when you wrote your first rhyme, you're realizing, all right, I obviously have a talent. Somebody challenged you, and that helped bring it out. Were you at this point when you wrote your first rhyme thinking, you know what? I want to take this to the next level. Like some people are just content being the local MC.
Yeah.
Did you want to bring it to the next level and say, look, I want to actually get into the industry. I want to penetrate this thing?
I definitely considered it, but I'm probably 14 at the time, and I'm anti-establishment. I'm anti-authority and all those things. I'm naturally rebellious, and I just won't do something just because somebody told me to do it. So in my mind, I gravitated what I considered to be the underground aspect of hip hop. Those people that, they were maybe putting out albums, they were doing shows, but they weren't selling millions of records. They weren't super rich. They're still maybe sleeping at home with their parents, but they're making maybe videos and they got albums out. So I was more gravitating, in my mind, I considered the fact that if I stayed true to the craft, then I wouldn't become popular. I would never be popular. So I was perfectly content with being that underground MC and just make a career out of crushing other suspect MCs and spreading knowledge, spreading what I believe to be, the truth and what people need to know.
So it sounds to me like, in my experience, I was looking more towards the fun and the enjoyment and a lot of the emotional stimulus and all that stuff, but you was caught up from the hip hop perspective more on the intellectual, the deep knowledge, to the point that you're not even aspiring to go into the industry. You're like, look, I want to keep it underground. Almost to the point, would you consider that to go into the industry was almost a stepping stone to possibly selling out? Is that?
Oh, that to me, industry was sell out.
Wow.
Major labels sell out. To me, I couldn't, because I was in the streets. I was selling drugs if I had to. I was, committing acts of violence, theft. I was completely corrupt. So in my mind, if I went into the industry, I couldn't do those things anymore. I couldn't still be street and be a professional. I had to do one or the other, or else, they wouldn't mix. They wouldn't be compatible. So I would have to sell out the street. In my mind, this is my rationale. At 14 or whatever, I had to sell out the street and leave that life in order to make this image and this career, if you will.
So you pretty much brought us now up to the point that you're at least 14 or 15 years old, entrenched into hip hop culture and entertainment. And it's at the point where, you're now seeing yourself not only with the skill set, but you want to preserve it, and you're not getting caught up into the pull of the industry or anything like that. At this stage in your life, was there anybody, grandmother, grandfather, friend, enemy, anybody who was trying to have any type of godly influence in your life at this point in time?
Not that I can remember. I mean, the only kind of religious influence I had at that time, my mother started getting into like New Age things and that kind of stuff. I really didn't listen to it. We didn't have those conversations in my home. There were a couple brothers that I mentioned, the brothers that came from New York. One was associated with the Zulu Nation, which we'll be talking about, I'm sure. One was associated with the 5% Nation. So, they had an angle, but it wasn't, it was just kind of theories. So I was garnering a lot from the music, from the messages coming through, the philosophies coming through. I didn't like to read, so I pretty much was just ingesting what was coming through the culture.
Now, some people, you mentioned 5%er or what have you. There may be some of our viewers who don't know what 5%er is or any of these type of things. Could you explain what that is real quick?
Basically, in short, because I hope we're going to dedicate an entire program to this, but the 5% Nation, or the nation of what they call the gods and the earths, came up in the 60s through one individual named Clarence 13X, and he was kind of he left the NOI, or the Nation of Islam, if you heard about Malcolm X or Elijah Muhammad, currently Louis Farrakhan. After Malcolm X was assassinated, he left Harlem Temple No. 7, and he, just like many others, and he started to craft his own worldview, if you will, and it became known as the 5% Nation, the nation of the gods and the earths. And he basically recruited young men in the Harlem area, and it's essentially obtaining a true knowledge that they believe came from an individual named W.D. Fard Muhammad, that was the mentor to Elijah Muhammad. And this secret knowledge was come to be delivered to the black man, if you will, that he is the original man, or essentially God. They broke down these numbers. There was a lot of what they call supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet. And there was the idea that 85% of humanity, especially the individuals that came from the African nations over to in the slave trade, that 85% of the world, if you will, or particularly the black men, were deaf, dumb, and blind, ignorant. They had no guidance. They were completely inept and inebriate, intellectually and morally corrupt. And then there were what was called the 10%. The 10% were those that knew, but that deliberately kept the lie, perpetuated the lie. And the base lie was that there was a false religion, what they called tricknology, a spook religion, where eventually these corrupt individuals through the ages introduced a religion that took the mind away from self and directed it towards an unseen God that you can't see, that's in some place that you can't see, that you can't go, and developed all of these laws. And this is where the Bible came from. And Moses introduced this, and Muhammad of Islam, of traditional Islam, developed these spook religions where they're chasing a lie. And the truth was that God is in you, God is you, we are the sole controllers. And this kind of question and answer didactic method where you memorize kind of a catechism of question and answer became the lessons, became the core doctrine, and you were ingratiated to memorize these things. And it was just very intriguing because it was a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, quote unquote, that never really amounted to anything, at least in my estimation. It was very circular in its reasoning, but it was just information, it was knowledge, it was a position, there was something to stand for, there was something to be a part of. And it gave an alternative to the traditional story of, like it was said, the white Jesus and all of these things. So that's it in a nutshell.
So then, at this point, when you're learning about this, because I know now you don't embrace these teachings,
right?
But back then, I would imagine this was really intriguing to you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It captured an area of my mind where I was seeking for answers. At some point, I was looking to make sense and put the knowledge that I had or the philosophies that I began to develop into a package. Because I was, at least in my approach, I was anti-establishment, anti-authority, but I was very particular and things had to be very organized and thoughtful and reasonable. So I didn't want to just kind of float around. I wanted to know what the answers were, and I wanted to have something to deliver that was tangible, practical, not theoretical.
Okay, so then at this point now, my question is, what was your view of Christians at that time? I remember when I was kind of engrossed into the industry, I looked at Christians like a bunch of happy people that don't even know why they're happy. They're always emotional, but they couldn't go back to anything that was intellectual and say, this is why I believe what I believe, and so on. I mean, what was going on in your mind and your view towards church and Christianity?
Yeah, traditionally, at least on my mother's side, her family was Catholic, Roman Catholic. So in my mind, all Christianity was Roman Catholic. That was Christianity. So to me, they were corrupt and hypocrites. And I didn't even consider them happy people. I just saw them as just, confused and lost individuals of no practical worth. They had no presence, if you will. There was a church that you always knew was a church, but where were the people? I never saw the people. Where did they go? Where did they come from? So to me, they were just, they just took up space, and I consider them weak. As I began to now pursue some of these things aggressively, I consider Christians weak, double-minded, unsure of themselves, insecure, no answers, a detestable creature.
Now, this is sharp because you know what? I believe firmly that the thoughts that you had are the thoughts that many have today.
Right.
My question is, when Christians, have Christians ever approached you when you had this type of thinking?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, as I get into that transition point, yeah, there's definitely, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, so then you got to a point where you see that, these folks are coming in. If you could just in a brief picture, and then what we'll do is we'll expand on it as we go further in our next sessions. What was your response, what was like your average response to the Christians who would come to you at this time frame when you was doing that? And I'm asking these questions for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, aggression, animosity, kind of a disgust, a disdain, and, you know, wouldn't give them an inch. I would consider them just pushovers, and they didn't know what they were talking about. I knew what I was talking about, and I'm just gonna bulldoze you and steamroll you, intellectually or physically, if we want to take it there.
Now, at this stage, what were the books that you were reading that gave you this picture? Because since you're into intelligence,
Yeah.
you more than likely are reading something. So what are you reading at that stage?
Well, that's the thing, is I hated reading.
Right, because I remember you said you hate reading.
I hated reading. So it was really
Listening.
it was up to that point where I didn't really read. I mean, I read some things as a child, reading, you know, different books here and there, but I just didn't have any passion for reading. I would get interested in something and pick it up and read it, but you know, I didn't even go at it like that. I was more of the mindset that I don't need to read some exterior book. I need to observe and master my surroundings and deal with the physical, you know, tangible level. And you got people studying books, their head's in a book, and they don't know how to govern themselves.
Would you say at this stage in your life that you were the reflector of other men's thoughts?
Absolutely, it has to be the truth, because you're developing an image that you're getting from outside. A whole lifestyle, a whole culture that I'm adopting and accepting as it. Where did it come from? Who perpetuated it? What are its origins? And you could study that out, but still, even the people at the beginning don't have an answer.
Right.
You know, it came from somewhere. And then now once the industry gets involved, they're doing all kinds of things that people don't have any control of. So things are just getting mixed and matched and mingled and amalgamated into this package that they're offering the consumer. And I was a consumer for the most part.
You know, I don't know about you, but as I listen to Brother Lance share these things, I know that it is very convincing. And it's to the point that you wonder, how did he come out of this? But I'm trusting that in our next episode, we're going to get to hear about how the Lord was able to bring him out of this type of thinking into the present understanding of his truth at this time. And Lance, I believe that a lot of people are going through similar struggles like what you were going through at that time. So again, I really appreciate you sharing that with us, brother. Well, our time is up. We want to thank you all for joining us here at TKS, and we want you to come back and this time invite a friend so that hopefully we can all enjoy the blessings together. Until next time, remember Proverbs 2 and verse 6, that it's the Lord that gives wisdom, and out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding.